Close your eyes and let your mind travel back more than 2,300 years ago to the great city of Pataliputra, the capital of the Mauryan Empire. A city filled with shining palaces, grand gateways, and the gentle sound of the river Ganga flowing by. In this city, in the royal palace of Emperor Binjasara, a child was born. A child who would one day become one of the greatest emperors in history. His name was Ashoka. Ashoka's grandfather was the legendary Chandragupta Maurya, the man who had built the mighty Mauryan Empire with the wisdom of his teacher, Chanakya. Ashoka's father, Binjasara, was the second emperor, ruling over a vast land that stretched from the Himalayas in the north to the deep forests of the Deccan in the south. Ashoka's mother is remembered in history as Subhadrangi, a woman of wisdom and grace. Legends say that before Ashoka's birth, Subhadrangi had a dream. In her dream, she saw the sun and the moon bowing down before her. The wise priests said this was no ordinary vision. It meant that her son would one day shine with greatness, and his name would be remembered for centuries. From the moment Ashoka opened his eyes, people around him sensed something unusual. He was not the eldest among his brothers, yet there was a sharpness in his gaze, a fire in his spirit. While other children of the palace played with toys of gold and silver, Ashoka found joy in observing the soldiers, the elephants, and the lessons of the wise scholars. As a young boy, Ashoka loved listening to stories from the elders' stories of kings and battles, of dharma and destiny. But unlike many children, he did not just listen. He asked questions, deep questions, questions that made even the wisest men pause before answering. But there was another side to him, too. He was brave, strong, and fearless, yet quick to anger. A servant once described him as a child with the heart of a lion, powerful, untamed, and destined to rule. The palace whispers called him Chand Ashoka, even in childhood, which means Ashoka the fierce. Not because he was cruel as a child, but because of his fiery energy, his unstoppable spirit. Yet, destiny has its own path. No one in the palace truly believed that young Ashoka, born not as the heir, but as just another prince among many brothers, would one day become the emperor. The throne seemed far away from his reach, but fate was watching, and slowly preparing the young boy for a journey that would change not only his life, but the history of the world itself. And so, little Ashoka grew up, learning, questioning, training, while the empire around him expanded, and the world awaited the rise of its future emperor. As the years passed, the young prince Ashoka grew stronger. His childhood curiosity transformed into sharp intelligence, and his restless spirit turned into unmatched courage. The empire of the Mauryas was vast, but it was not always peaceful. In the northwestern region, in the city of Takshashila, place of scholars and warriors, a great rebellion broke out. The people rose against the Mauryan officials, and chaos spread like wildfire. The emperor, Binjasara, worried about losing control, needed a strong and fearless commander to crush the revolt. Many princes stood ready, but none were chosen. Instead, the emperor's eyes turned to Ashoka, the son not born as heir, but burning with the fire of destiny. Ashoka was sent to Takshashila with his army. The march was long, the roads filled with danger, but the young prince never hesitated. When he reached the rebel city, he faced fierce resistance. Arrows filled the skies, swords clashed, and the cries of war echoed across the battlefield. But Ashoka fought with the heart of a lion. His strategies were sharp, his moves swift, and his courage unstoppable. Within days, the rebellion was crushed. The people of Takshashila, once against the Mauryas, now bowed before the young prince, whispering his name in awe. News of his victory spread quickly across the empire. From the palaces of Pataliputra to the distant villages, people began to speak of Ashoka, the prince who never lost a battle. Soldiers respected him, ministers feared him, and the common people admired his strength. But this glory came with a shadow. His brothers grew jealous. They watched as Ashoka's fame rose higher and higher, while their own names faded in comparison. Whispers of rivalry and hatred filled the palace halls. Some even plotted to keep Ashoka away from the throne. Yet Ashoka did not care for courtly games. He cared only for action, for the thrill of command, for the roar of victory. In every campaign, he grew fiercer. His enemies began to call him Chande Shoka, Ashoka the Fierce. He showed no mercy to rebels or traitors. Justice, for him, was sharp and quick like the edge of a sword. Still, behind this fiery image, there was a restless heart. He was a prince who ruled the battlefield, but had not yet discovered the true path of his life. The empire, vast and powerful, was slowly preparing to test him with greater challenges. Challenges of war, of power, and of destiny. And as Ashoka stood on the battlefield of Takshashila, watching the smoke rise into the skies, he did not yet know that this was only the beginning of a journey that would make him not just a warrior prince, but one of the greatest emperors the world has ever known. The palace of Pataliputra was filled with whispers of power. Emperor Binjasara was growing old, and soon the question of succession would arise. Which prince would wear the crown of the Mauryas? Which son would rule the vast empire? Among the many princes, Ashoka was both admired and feared. The ministers spoke of his victories, his sharp mind, and his fearlessness. But his brothers, they saw him as a threat. When Binjasara fell ill, the palace became a place of secret meetings, silent rivalries, and hidden swords. Some princes hoped to be chosen, others feared being ignored. And in the middle of this storm stood Ashoka. On the outside, but burning with determination within. As the days passed, the emperor's health weakened, and then the inevitable moment arrived. Emperor Binjasara, son of Chandragupta, ruler of the Mauryan Empire, was no more. The throne of Pataliputra stood empty, yet heavy with the weight of destiny. What followed was not peace, but bloodshed. A fierce struggle for power began. Brothers fought brothers, swords clashed in the royal halls, and the empire trembled under the storm of ambition. Ashoka, with the loyalty of his soldiers and the support of the people, fought with ruthless strength. One by one, his rivals fell. Some surrendered, some were silenced forever. The road to the throne was paved with conflict and sacrifice. And at last, when the dust settled, when the cries of battle faded into silence, it was Ashoka who stood victorious. In the great court of Pataliputra, before ministers, generals, and monks, Ashoka was crowned the emperor of the Mauryan Empire. The golden crown was placed upon his head, and the conch shells echoed across the land. But this was no ordinary empire. The Mauryan realm stretched farther than any kingdom India had ever known. From the snowy peaks of the Himalayas to the fertile plains of the Ganga, from the deserts of the west to the deep forests of the south. Villages, cities, ports, and mighty rivers, all now under the rule of one man. The people celebrated, the soldiers cheered, and the empire declared its new master, Ashoka, the fierce, was now Samrat, Ashoka, the emperor. Yet, even in this moment of triumph, the crown was heavy, for with power came responsibility. With victory came the burden of ruling millions of souls. The young emperor looked across his vast empire and knew his journey had only just begun. The fire that burned within him would soon test him again. The world would soon see not just the warrior prince, but the emperor who would shape history forever. The drums of Pataliputra beat loud and strong, announcing to every corner of the land that Ashoka was now the supreme emperor. His throne shone with gold, but his rule was forged with iron. In the first years of his reign, Ashoka was not the gentle ruler that history would later remember. He was harsh, strict, and feared by many. Justice under him was sharp and unforgiving. Those who disobeyed the empire's laws were punished without mercy. It was in these years that the name Chand Ashoka, Ashoka, the fierce became known across the land. He expanded his armies, trained his soldiers, and made sure that no rebellion could rise without being crushed. The empire's borders were guarded with elephants, horses, and mighty warriors. The people whispered that Ashoka's eyes could see through lies, and his decisions were as unshakable as the stone walls of his palaces. But Ashoka was not only a man of war, he was also a builder, a planner, a ruler with vision. Under his order, roads stretched across the empire, connecting distant lands. Rest houses were built for travelers, and wells were dug along highways to give water to the thirsty. Trade flourished, bringing silk, spices, and gems from faraway lands into the Mauryan markets. In the city of Pataliputra, the emperor's court glittered with wealth and wisdom. Ministers, generals, scholars, and diplomats filled the grand halls. Envoys from distant kingdoms came to bow before Ashoka, bringing gifts of gold, rare animals, and fine cloth. And yet, behind the glitter of success, there was still a shadow. Ashoka ruled with fear more than with love. His people respected him, but many also trembled before his power. The empire was stable, but its heart was restless. Ashoka himself carried within him a fire that was never satisfied. Every victory only made him hunger for more. Every province under his control made him look toward the next. To the southeast lay a land that had not yet bowed to the Mauryas, a land called Kalinga. It was a kingdom of warriors, proud and independent. Its people were brave, its rulers unyielding. Kalinga was not just another province, it was a jewel of trade, a land of the sea, a doorway to wealth and power. And for Ashoka, it became an obsession. Night after night, as he walked the palace corridors, Ashoka's thoughts returned to Kalinga. The dream of bringing that proud land under his banner grew stronger. The stage was slowly being set for the war that would change not only the empire, but also Ashoka's soul forever. The years of planning were over. The Mauryan army marched with thunder in its steps, elephants shaking the earth, horses neighing, and soldiers carrying sharp spears that glistened in the sun. Their destination was Kalinga. Kalinga, the proud land by the eastern seas, stood strong and unafraid. Its people loved their freedom more than life itself. They were farmers, traders, sailors, but also warriors. They knew the Mauryan army was vast and powerful, but they swore they would never surrender. When Ashoka's forces reached the borders of Kalinga, the drums of war began to beat. The two mighty armies faced each other, like dark clouds ready to clash in a storm. The war that followed was unlike any Ashoka had ever seen. Swords clashed, Arrows filled the skies, and elephants roared as they charged into battle. The sound of war drums mixed with the cries of men. The fields of Kalinga turned red with blood. The people of Kalinga fought with unimaginable courage. Men, women, even the elderly, picked up weapons to protect their land. They fought not just for victory, but for freedom, for their home, for their children. But the Mauryan army was vast, disciplined, and unstoppable. Slowly, Kalinga began to fall. Villages burned, rivers ran crimson, and the proud land was torn apart. When the battle ended, silence covered the land. But it was not the silence of peace, it was the silence of death. Ashoka walked across the battlefield. His feet touched broken weapons, shattered chariots, and the lifeless bodies of thousands. History says more than 100,000 people were killed, and many more were wounded or captured. As he walked, he heard the cries of mothers searching for their children, the wails of wives holding the bodies of their husbands, the whispers of dying men calling out for water. He saw children clinging to the lifeless hands of their fathers. He saw rivers that once gave life, now carrying blood. For the first time, Ashoka's heart trembled. The warrior emperor, the fierce conqueror, the man who feared nothing, stood still, shaken by what his own hands had created. He had won Kalinga, but standing in the middle of the battlefield, he felt no victory, only emptiness. Ashoka looked at the destruction, and the thought struck him, what have I done? He had conquered land, but he had lost his peace. He had taken Kalinga, but in doing so, he had filled his empire with sorrow. The cries of Kalinga would echo in his ears for the rest of his life. That day, something changed inside Ashoka. The sword that had once brought him glory now felt heavy with guilt. The crown that once shone with power now seemed darker than ever. And in that silence, surrounded by death, the emperor, who was once called Chanda Ashoka the Fierce, began his journey toward becoming Dharma, Ashoka the Compassionate. The war of Kalinga was over, but the war within Ashoka's heart had just begun. The battlefield of Kalinga still haunted Ashoka's heart. Night after night, as he closed his eyes, he could hear the cries of the dying. He could see the smoke rising, smell the burning villages, and feel the silence of lifeless bodies lying beneath the sky. Ashoka had once dreamed of power, of empire, of endless victories. But now, sitting alone in the quiet halls of his palace, he felt no joy. The golden crown on his head seemed heavier than the weight of the entire world. One evening, it is said, Ashoka wandered out of his palace, disguised as a common man. He walked through the streets, past the people of Kalinga who had survived. He saw widows sitting in silence, children begging for food, families searching for loved ones who would never return, and his heart broke. In that moment, Ashoka whispered to himself, never again will I cause such pain. What kind of victory leaves the land filled with sorrow? It was then that Ashoka began to seek answers, not in the sword, not in conquest, but in wisdom. His heart turned towards the gentle teachings of the Buddha. The words of the Buddha spoke to him like cool rain falling on burning fire. Life is suffering. Hatred can never end through hatred. It ends only through love and compassion. Ashoka began to spend time with monks, listening to their chants, their calm voices, their simple wisdom. Slowly, his restless mind began to quiet. The fierce emperor began to feel a new strength not of weapons, but of peace. He decided he would no longer be known as Chand Ashoka the Fierce. From now on, He would walk the path of Dhamma, the path of truth, kindness, and nonviolence. He ordered that no more unnecessary wars be fought. He declared that true victory was not the conquest of land, but the conquest of hearts. Ashoka, the once cruel conqueror, was changing into Ashoka, the protector. His heart, once hardened by ambition, was now softened by compassion. From the ashes of Kalinga, a new emperor was born, one who carried not the sword of destruction, but the message of peace. The transformation had begun, and the world would soon witness a ruler unlike any it had ever seen before. After the sorrow of Kalinga, he turned fully towards the path of the Buddha, the path of peace, compassion, and wisdom. The emperor who once thundered across battlefields now sat quietly among monks, listening to the gentle sound of their chants. The palace, once filled with the noise of war councils, now echoed with the calm voice of teachers who spoke of kindness, patience, and truth. Ashoka did more than listen, he acted. He declared that the empire would follow the principles of Dhamma not as a religion for some, but as a way of life for all. He ordered the building of monasteries where monks could teach, and stupas where people could meditate and remember the Buddha. Among these, the great Sanchi Stupa still stands today, carrying the whispers of that time. But Ashoka's vision was larger than India alone. He wanted the message of peace to flow across the world like a river. He sent missionaries far and wide. To the north, monks traveled into the Himalayas and beyond, to Central Asia and China. To the west, they carried the message to the kingdoms of Persia and Greece. To the south, his own son Mahinda and daughter Sangamita journeyed to Sri Lanka, carrying with them the sacred branch of the Bodhi tree under which the Buddha had attained enlightenment. That tree was planted in Anuradhapura, where it still grows as a living symbol of Ashoka's gift. Ashoka also made sure that his people lived better lives. He ordered the planting of trees along the roads, the digging of wells, and the building of hospitals for both humans and animals. He sent officers called Dhamma Mahamatras, whose duty was not to collect taxes, but to spread kindness, justice, and care. The emperor, who once brought fear with his sword, was now bringing comfort with his compassion. People began to call him Dharma, Ashoka, Ashoka the righteous. His fame spread beyond the empire, beyond the seas, into lands that had never heard his name before. And yet, Ashoka himself lived simply, wearing plain clothes, eating modest meals, and spending time in meditation. The crown still sat upon his head, but his heart was no longer bound by its weight. He had discovered that the greatest power was not in conquering kingdoms, but in conquering the human heart. Under Ashoka, the Mauryan Empire became not just a land of wealth and strength, but a land of compassion, tolerance, and peace. The warrior had truly become a sage. The emperor, once feared, was now deeply loved. And as the monks chanted in the cool breeze of evening, Ashoka's soul found the peace it had been searching for all along. Even as Ashoka spread the message of peace through his actions and the teachings of the Buddha, he knew that words alone might not reach every corner of his vast empire. From the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas to the distant shores of the Indian Ocean, the people needed guidance, reminders of the principles he cherished. And so Ashoka turned to stone, the strongest, most enduring messenger of all. Across his empire, he carved messages into pillars, rocks, and cave walls. These became known as the Ashoka Edicts. On these stones, Ashoka wrote not about battles, not about conquest, but about Dharma, moral law, truth, kindness, and respect for all living beings. He urged his officials to treat the people with fairness. He reminded his subjects to be compassionate to animals, to help the poor, and to live lives of honesty. One pillar might stand beside a bustling market, reminding traders and villagers to act with fairness. Another might rise near a lonely forest, telling travelers to plant trees and care for the land. Ashoka's governance was unlike any that had come before. He did not rely on fear alone. Yes, he was once a fierce warrior, but now he ruled with compassionate authority. His officers, called Dhamma Mahamatras, were tasked with spreading his message, not collecting taxes or enforcing punishment. They ensured that hospitals were built, wells dug, and justice administered with fairness. He built rest houses for travelers and planted shade trees along roads so that even the weary and tired could find comfort in his empire. Animals were cared for as well. Elephants, horses, and even smaller creatures were protected under his laws. And the beauty of these edicts was that they spoke to every person, whether rich or poor, soldier or farmer, scholar or child. Their simple messages of morality and kindness transcended time, and many of these stones still stand today, whispering Ashoka's teachings across millennia. In this way, Ashoka became not just a ruler of land, but a ruler of hearts. His kingdom thrived not because of fear, but because of respect, care, and the guiding light of Dharma. Through these pillars and inscriptions, Ashoka sent a silent message to future generations. Power without compassion is empty. Authority without justice is fleeting. True greatness lies in kindness, peace, and the courage to change. And so, even as the sun set over the sprawling Mauryan Empire, the legacy of Ashoka's governance shone brightly, a gentle, unwavering light, guiding all who followed the path of righteousness. Years passed, and Ashoka, the once fierce warrior, grew older. The battles of his youth, the victories, and the sorrows had all shaped him into a ruler unlike any the world had known. The Mauryan Empire, under his guidance, was vast and peaceful. Trade flourished, rivers carried goods and stories alike, and roads connected distant lands, all guided by Ashoka's vision of Dharma. But more importantly, the hearts of the people were touched by his compassion. Ashoka's transformation from a ruthless conqueror to a compassionate emperor became a story told across generations. Parents whispered it to their children, monks repeated it in quiet monasteries, and travelers carried it to lands far beyond India. Even after his death, around 232 BCE, Ashoka's influence did not fade. His pillars, stupas, and inscriptions continued to speak across time. They reminded people that true strength lies not in armies, but in kindness, not in fear, but in fairness, not in conquest, but in compassion. The legacy of Ashoka lives on even today. The lion capital of Ashoka, once a simple royal emblem, now shines as the national emblem of India, a symbol of courage, peace, and wisdom. The Ashoka Chakra, the wheel of Dharma, adorns the Indian flag, reminding every citizen of the path of righteousness. Ashoka taught the world that power can be gentle and greatness can be compassionate. He showed that even the fiercest hearts can change, and that one person's journey can transform a whole empire. And so, as we look back over the centuries, we remember Ashoka not for the battles he fought, but for the peace he built, not for the lands he conquered, but for the hearts he touched. The story of Ashoka the Great is a story of change, hope, and enduring wisdom. A story that whispers across time, saying, no matter how dark the past, the heart always holds the power to choose peace. Tonight, as the winds move softly across the ruins of ancient India, and the moonlight glimmers on the stones of Sanchi, the spirit of Ashoka rests quietly, watching over a world that still remembers his gentle greatness. Thus ends the story of Samrat Ashoka the Great, a man who began as a warrior drenched in blood, but ended as a king bathed in compassion. His life is proof that no matter how dark the past may be, the heart always holds the power to choose peace. And tonight, as you drift into dreams, may you carry with you the whispers of Ashoka's journey from war to wisdom, from cruelty to kindness, from emperor to messenger of peace.